You know, there is something quite extraordinary that happens to a person when they begin to see, really see, not with their eyes, mind you, but with that deeper faculty that resides somewhere between the heart and the soul. And what they discover, what I have discovered through decades of sitting with the human psyche, is perhaps the most profound paradox of our existence. The more conscious you become, the more alone you find yourself. Now, I do not mean alone in the simple sense of lacking companions or finding oneself without social engagement. No, this is something far more fundamental, far more unsettling. It is the aloneness that comes when you begin to perceive the world as it truly is, rather than as we have collectively agreed to pretend it is. And once this seeing begins, there is no returning to the comfortable blindness that allows most people to move through their lives in relative contentment. I have spent my life studying the human mind, watching as individuals undergo what we might call spiritual awakening. And time and again, I witnessed the same curious phenomenon. As consciousness expands, as the veils of unconsciousness begin to lift, these individuals find themselves increasingly isolated from the very world they once belonged to. They become strangers in their own lives, foreigners in familiar territory. But why should this be so? Why should greater awareness lead to greater separation? The answer lies in understanding something that most people would rather not acknowledge. We live, all of us, within a kind of collective dream, a shared fantasy about what matters, about what is real, about what deserves our attention and energy. This dream is so pervasive, so complete, that we mistake it for reality itself. Consider for a moment how society functions. We have created elaborate systems of meaning, complex hierarchies of importance, intricate rituals of daily existence. And these systems work beautifully, mind you, so long as everyone participates in the same fundamental delusion. We agree that certain things matter enormously when they actually matter very little. We agree to ignore certain truths that would be inconvenient to acknowledge. We agree to play roles that have little to do with who we actually are. The person who begins to awaken spiritually finds themselves in a most peculiar position. They begin to see through these agreed-upon illusions. They start to perceive the mechanisms by which we maintain our collective blindness. And this creates an immediate problem because they can no longer participate in the dance with the same unconscious enthusiasm they once possessed. I remember once observing a patient of mine, a man who had undergone what he described as a profound spiritual experience. He came to me not because he was troubled by what he had experienced, but because he could no longer relate to anyone in his life. His friends spoke of things that seemed to him suddenly trivial. His colleagues pursued goals that appeared to him utterly meaningless. His family engaged in dramas that he could see were elaborate distractions from deeper truths they were unwilling to face. This man was not arrogant, you understand. He was not looking down upon others from some imagined spiritual height. He was simply seeing clearly for perhaps the first time in his life. And this clarity had rendered him unable to participate in the unconscious games that bind human society together. He had become, in the truest sense of the word, alone. This aloneness is not chosen, you see. It is imposed by the very nature of consciousness itself. When you begin to perceive the unconscious patterns that govern human behavior, when you start to see the shadow that lurks behind every social interaction, when you recognize the profound fear that drives most human activity, you find yourself speaking a language that others cannot understand. You might try, at first, to share what you see. You might attempt to point out the illusions, to reveal the unconscious motivations, to illuminate the deeper currents that move beneath the surface of ordinary experience. But you will discover something rather disheartening. People do not want to see. They will resist your attempts to wake them with all the force they can muster. They will attack your perceptions, question your sanity, dismiss your insights as the ravings of someone who has lost touch with reality. And perhaps, in a sense, they are correct. You have lost touch with their reality. You have stepped outside the collective agreement about what constitutes normal human experience. You have broken the unspoken contract that binds society together. You have become what I call an outsider to your own species. This creates a profound loneliness that is unlike any other form of isolation. It is not the loneliness of physical separation or social rejection. It is the loneliness of consciousness itself, the inevitable solitude that comes when you can no longer share in the fundamental assumptions that make human community possible. The spiritually awakened person finds themselves caught between two worlds. They can no longer fully inhabit the unconscious realm they have left behind, yet they have not yet found their way to a place where others share their expanded awareness. They exist in a kind of psychological no man's land, too conscious to sleep, yet not conscious enough to find others who are equally awake. And so you find yourself in this strange territory, neither fully here nor there, watching the world with eyes that see too much and yet never enough. It is, I confess, a place I have inhabited for many years myself. The consulting room where I sit with troubled souls has shown me something that most would prefer to remain hidden. The great majority of human suffering comes not from what people experience, but from what they refuse to experience. You see, consciousness is not merely an individual phenomenon. It is also collective. We breathe, as it were, the same psychological air. We share unconscious assumptions, unspoken agreements about reality that keep us bound together in a kind of psychic solidarity. But when someone begins to awaken, when they start to question these fundamental assumptions, they discover something rather unsettling. They discover that most of what we call normal life is actually a form of sleepwalking. The awakened person watches their former friends and colleagues moving through their days like actors who have forgotten they are performing. They see the desperate busyness that masks existential emptiness. They perceive the frantic pursuit of status and security as attempts to avoid confronting the deeper questions of existence. They witness the elaborate psychological defenses that people construct to protect themselves from their own shadow, their own unlived life. This seeing becomes a burden, not because the awakened person wishes to judge others, but because they can no longer participate in the collective forgetting that makes ordinary social life possible. They sit at dinner parties where people discuss politics and gossip and career advancement, and they hear beneath these conversations the profound yearning for meaning that no one dares to acknowledge directly. They attend family gatherings where everyone maintains their familiar roles, and they see the unlived possibilities, the suppressed truths, the unspoken pain that lurks behind every smile. It is not that they become superior to others. Indeed, the truly awakened person often becomes more humble, more aware of their own limitations and unconscious patterns. But they cannot unknow what they have learned about the nature of human existence. They cannot close their eyes to the vast machinery of denial and projection that keeps society functioning. They cannot participate with genuine enthusiasm in activities that they now recognize as elaborate distractions from more essential concerns. This creates what I have come to understand as the fundamental loneliness of consciousness. It is the isolation that comes not from being rejected by others, but from no longer being able to find genuine connection within the framework of conventional reality. The awakened person speaks a different language now, perceives different priorities, responds to different imperatives. They have become, in essence, citizens of a different world while still residing in this one. I have observed that many people at this stage make a critical error. They attempt to bridge this gap by becoming teachers or missionaries of consciousness. They try to wake others up, to share their insights, to pull people toward the light they have discovered. But this approach almost invariably leads to greater isolation and often to considerable inner conflict. Why should this be so? Because consciousness cannot be given as a gift. It cannot be imposed from the outside or acquired through instruction alone. Consciousness must be earned through suffering, through facing one's own darkness, through the slow and often painful process of individuation. The person who tries to shortcut this process for others, who attempts to save them from their necessary struggles, only succeeds in making themselves into an object of resistance or even hostility. The spiritually awakened person must learn something that goes against every instinct of compassion and connection. They must learn to be alone with their awareness. They must discover how to carry their consciousness without burdening others with it, how to see clearly without demanding that others see what they see. This is perhaps the most difficult lesson of all, because it requires accepting that most people are not ready for the kind of awakening you have experienced, and that this is not a failing on their part or yours. It is simply the way consciousness unfolds in human life. There is a profound sadness in this recognition, but also a strange kind of peace. When you stop trying to wake others up, when you cease attempting to share your insights with those who are not ready to receive them, you discover something unexpected. You find that your aloneness, while still real, becomes less burdensome. You begin to understand that your consciousness is not a possession to be shared, but a responsibility to be carried.